I hate Sundays. Despite the fact that it has been 45 years, I can remember shouting this sentence in my head as clearly as if it were yesterday. The scariest and simultaneously most fascinating aspect of this obscure childhood memory is the extraordinary restraint exhibited by my 7-year-old self, not only in avoiding the vocalization of a sentiment, which in my staunchly religious, missionary Baptist home would have been considered the height of blasphemy, but also in the fact that even the thought was self-censored to a degree. The truth, you see, is that I did not really hate Sundays. What I actually hated was going to church. Organized religion in the 21st century is decidedly much more kid-friendly than when I was a 7-year-old in 1970. Today's diminutive worshippers have luxuries such as children's church, in which they are allowed to escape the confines of the adult service in favor of snacks, art projects, and VeggieTales DVDs for all, or at least part of the morning religious ritual. As an adult, I have also attended churches that offered school-aged children busy bags, great little care packages filled with puzzles, games, stories, and coloring materials to help pass the time. Additionally, the runtime of morning worship at the racially integrated American Baptist Church that my Caucasian husband and I most recently attended was a mere 1 hour and 15 minutes, unlike the marathon sessions of the African American Baptist Church to which I belonged as a child. So, to my friends and relatives who remain on the extreme religious right, now poised to bury me alive in a deluge of indignant email and vitriolic Facebook posts, please give me a chance to explain. My aversion to church was not the premature manifestation of atheistic tendencies. I had no doubt, then as now, that God existed. At Christmas time, when my mother would set up the Woolworth ceramic nativity scene, complete with the stable she made from a cardboard box that was a remnant of my father's short-lived part-time career as a salesman for the Mason Shoe Company, I would gaze adoringly at the tiny, blue-eyed, blonde-haired, haloed baby Jesus for hours. At Easter, I would experience genuine sadness upon hearing the terrible story of the crucifixion, knowing at some deep, visceral level that my sins, whatever they might be, were to blame for the horrific suffering which that nice baby Jesus had grown up to endure. It wasn't God or Jesus, or even Christianity as a concept that offended my childish sensibilities. Instead, it was the fact that somehow I knew, even in the naivete of my extreme youth, that the activities that many of the adult church folk around me were trying to pass off as faith just weren't what Jesus really had in mind. In all the stories of Jesus and his disciples, it always seemed to me that, despite his extraordinary abilities, turning water into wine, healing the sick, raising the dead, etc., Jesus was also just one of the guys in many ways. He joked with his followers and teased them, especially brash, often foot-in-mouth Simon Peter. When the 12 started freaking out during a storm, rudely awakening Jesus from a much-needed nap, raising the dead has got to take a lot out of a person, even if he is the Son of God, for goodness sakes. I could always imagine Jesus stumbling up on deck with a mad case of bedhead shouting at the waves, "Peace! Be still!" and staggering back to bed, greatly annoyed at having been disturbed from his rest, thinking, "Do I have to do everything around here?" In contrast, however, African American church pastors of that era seemed to occupy an artificially exalted position, an odd hybrid of corporate bigwig and tribal chieftain. I remember one pastor who strutted about the pulpit wearing these impossibly shiny shark skin suits, looking more like a member of the Motown group The Temptations than a humble man of God. Later, Black preachers began to wear elaborate robes of varying colors and trimmed in velvet or braided cords of red or gold. During afternoon services, where several congregations might come together, these men would sit in ostentatious alignment before their combined congregations, reminding me, even at that young age, of the ill-tempered, aging peacocks that made a habit of tormenting the children at the Deming Park Zoo. This image from the memorial service for Charleston, South Carolina church shooting victim, Pastor Clementa Pinckney, with a dozen or so of these similarly outfitted individuals, provided an alarmingly familiar backdrop for former President Barack Obama as he delivered the eulogy. What always bothered me, even as a youngster, was the faint but distinct odor of insincerity amid all this pompous posturing. Pastor Shiny Suits was eventually ousted from our church in a bitter no-confidence vote, but not before he nearly bled the church treasury dry in what was apparently a payoff designed to make him go away. Others would preach that we should follow the example of the Good Samaritan by showing kindness to strangers, or that we should turn the other cheek when wronged by another, and in the next breath spout the most hateful, homophobic rhetoric imaginable. So, what was up with that? CNN contributor, the Reverend DeForest Soaries Jr., offered a clue in a 2010 opinion piece, Black Churches and the Role of Empowerment. The remnants of slavery and 100 years of Jim Crow segregation were powerful forces in undermining feelings of self-worth among African Americans. The church was the one area where Blacks could feel respected, valued, and, perhaps, most importantly, experience the thrill of wielding not only autonomy, but power in various forms. Sadly, however, it is clear that power, whether real or imagined, has the tendency to corrupt. This became painfully clear to me when I chanced upon an online article about the fate of one of my former churches, Friendship Baptist Church, in Lansing, Michigan, where I was a member from 1997 until I moved away in 2005, and where my husband and I were married, and our late son was baptized more than 2 decades ago. This sordid tale of two factions battling for control, each accusing the other of a host of decidedly unchristian misdeeds within a church that I had truly loved and steadfastly believed embodied the spirit of its name, friendship, left me with a deep sense of despondency, to say the least. In spite of all of this, however, I no longer hold the animosity for Sundays in general, or organized religion specifically, that I once did. I have come to realize that, much like the childhood game of telephone, where a perfectly reasonable message can be hopelessly lost in translation as it is relayed from person to person, the true purpose of faith can be subject to an equally unhappy fate when placed freely at the disposal of flawed human beings. This is no reason, however, to simply throw up our hands and walk away in utter exasperation. Pope Francis, on his historic visit to the United States, remarked in a 2013 interview with America magazine that discernment was a critical pillar of his own personal ministry. The challenge is to recognize that our interpretation of God's will may have been corrupted by selfish desires, the prejudices of ourselves and others, our own limited understanding, and the distortion of God's word, both inadvertent and intentional, by those around us. By striving always to approach faith, worship practices, and life itself with the open mind and open heart recommended by the late Pope Francis, I am learning to reconcile my differences with Sundays. Thankfully, We are on speaking terms again, enjoying each other's company no longer in formal worship services, but in quiet meditation and the relaxed and loving society of family members and friends. While I still disagree with much of what Ian Van Zandt terms religiosity, I can now enjoy what is good about my former nemesis known as Sunday, and leave the rest alone.